Big Shaq built his empire from nothing, turning Shaq and Wells into a powerhouse. But when whispers of corruption and abuse within his company reach him, he realizes power has made his executives blind and reckless. Instead of launching an investigation, he does something no one expects. He goes undercover as a receptionist. Treated like an outsider in his own building, he witnesses greed, favoritism, and outright cruelty firsthand. But they don't know who he really is. And when the truth finally comes out, the entire company will never be the same. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The skyline of New York stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Shaq and Wells Enterprises, a multi-billion-dollar consulting firm that Big Dom Shaq had built from the ground up. A symbol of success, the company was a powerhouse in the industry, boasting high-profile clients, elite partnerships, and a reputation for excellence. And at the center of it all stood Dom, a self-made mogul, a man whose journey from nothing to one of the most powerful CEOs in America was legendary. At 42, Dom had everything: wealth, power, respect. With his sharp jawline, intense gaze, and tailored suits that exuded authority, he commanded every room he entered. Yet, despite his success, he had never forgotten where he came from. He had once been the underdog, the struggling intern, the overlooked employee, fighting for recognition. It was those struggles that had shaped his leadership style, making him a boss who valued hard work and integrity. But something had changed. The company that had once been a beacon of opportunity was slowly rotting from the inside. It had started as a whisper in passing, a junior analyst quitting abruptly, a talented employee leaving without explanation. Then, the whispers grew louder. Stories of mistreatment, blatant favoritism, and toxic leadership surfacing in anonymous complaints. Dom had dismissed the first few as routine corporate drama, misunderstandings, personal conflicts, things that happened in any large organization. But then, the complaints became patterns. HR reports hinted at unusual turnover rates in certain departments. Lower-level employees were quitting, citing hostile work environments. Some mentioned being overlooked for promotions despite years of hard work. Others felt ignored, their voices drowned out by an executive team that played by its own rules. Dom trusted his leadership team. He had handpicked them, groomed them for their roles. Could they really be the problem? He wasn't sure. Until the email came. It arrived at 1:13 a.m., long after most of the city had fallen asleep. The subject line read, "Help us." Dom opened the email, expecting another generic complaint. But as he read, his chest tightened. The sender, anonymous, detailed a culture of corruption within Shaq and Wells. High-ranking executives mistreating employees, discrimination, and abuse of power. The email outlined shocking behavior. Junior employees being humiliated in meetings. Managers stealing ideas from their teams and passing them off as their own. A receptionist fired for speaking up about misconduct. Certain executives living in excess, billing expensive vacations as business expenses while their teams struggled under unrealistic workloads. Then came the part that hit Dom the hardest. "We know you built this company on fairness and hard work, but those values are gone. The people at the top don't respect us. To them, we're nothing. We are either their servants or invisible. If you care about what you built, do something before it's too late." Dom stared at the screen long after finishing the email. His jaw clenched. His heartbeat was steady, controlled. But beneath that control was rage. His company had become everything he had fought against. A CEO's natural response would be to launch an internal investigation, bring in HR, audit the departments, have interviews, meetings, reports. But Dom knew better. Executives would cover their tracks. HR would conduct damage control. Employees who spoke up would be silenced or fired. If he wanted the real truth, he needed to see it with his own eyes. That's when he made the boldest decision of his career. Instead of announcing an investigation, Dom disappeared from the executive floor. The next morning, Shaq and Wells employees arrived at work to a memo from the board of directors. Effective immediately, Big Shaq will be stepping away from daily operations to focus on company expansion and strategic growth. The leadership team breathed a sigh of relief. No explanation, no warning, just a temporary leave. Meanwhile, downstairs, a new receptionist reported for duty. His name was Darius Coleman. Dressed in a cheap department store suit, no designer labels, no expensive watch, no high-end cologne. His beard was slightly unshaven, his hair trimmed just enough to avoid looking sloppy. He had ditched his usual car service and taken the subway, a detail that made him blend in even more. He walked through the lobby unnoticed, just another invisible worker in a sea of employees. His first test? Nobody recognized him. Not the security guard at the front desk, not the receptionist he was replacing, not the employees who passed him in the hall without a glance. The man who signed their paychecks had become just another nameless face in the crowd. And that was exactly what he wanted. As Dom stepped behind the front desk, he took in his new world. The receptionist's area was a stark contrast to the executive suites upstairs. Instead of polished boardrooms and luxury offices, it was a cramped, chaotic space. Phones rang constantly. Employees walked past without saying hello. He glanced at the clock. 8:57 a.m. The workday hadn't even started, but he could already see how different this world was. Within the first 10 minutes, he noticed executives walking past lower-level employees as if they didn't exist. A senior manager snapping at a secretary for getting his coffee order wrong. 2 junior employees gossiping about how the receptionist job is for people who can't do anything better. Dom took a deep breath. He had only been here for minutes, but already, the truth was starting to show. He straightened his name tag. This was his company, his empire, his legacy, and it was about to be turned upside down. The cold morning air nipped at Dom's skin as he stepped off the subway, blending seamlessly into the sea of workers moving toward Shaq and Wells Enterprises. For the first time in years, he was walking into his own building as an outsider. No personal driver, no security detail, no assistant waiting by the elevators with his itinerary for the day. Just another nameless employee showing up for work. The cheap gray suit itched against his skin, a stark contrast to the custom-tailored ones he usually wore. His shoes, scuffed and unpolished, lacked the weight of luxury. The Rolex that once adorned his wrist was missing, replaced by an outdated digital watch he had dug out of storage. Everything about him had been carefully stripped of power and status. As he neared the towering glass doors, he braced himself for what was coming. No warm greetings from the security guards, no hushed murmurs of recognition, no admiring glances. Just silence. And then, he stepped inside. The moment Dom walked through the entrance, the difference was staggering. Employees brushed past him without a glance, focused on their own conversations, their own schedules. He wasn't acknowledged, wasn't greeted. It was as if he didn't exist. At the front desk, the receptionist, a young woman with bright red nails tapping against her keyboard, barely spared him a glance before handing him a visitor badge without asking his name. Dom clipped the badge onto his suit pocket, fighting the urge to correct her mistake. "You're not the CEO today, just play the part." He gave her a polite nod and walked deeper into his company. As he approached the administrative office, the voices around him painted a picture of the culture within Shaq and Wells. Laughter spilled from an executive lounge, where 2 high-ranking employees joked about taking an extended lunch. A manager strolled past, AirPods in, coffee in one hand, eyes never leaving his phone. Meanwhile, junior employees rushed between cubicles, their postures tense, their expressions weary. The stark contrast was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just bad leadership. This was a broken system. As Dom arrived at the receptionist station, he barely had time to take in his surroundings before his new boss appeared. Vanessa King, the head of administration, strolled toward him with a bored expression, eyes sharp and assessing. In her early 40s, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had carved out power in a place that allowed her to wield it unchecked. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, not a strand out of place. The gold bracelet on her wrist jingled softly as she crossed her arms, eyeing him like he was already a disappointment. "You the new temp?" she asked, her tone indifferent. Dom nodded. Darius Coleman. First day. She didn't introduce herself, didn't offer a handshake. Instead, she grabbed a thick manual from the desk, shoved it into his hands, and sighed dramatically. "Read that," she said. "Figure it out." That was it. No tour of the office, no introductions, no training. Dom clenched his jaw but kept his expression neutral. Vanessa turned away, already moving toward her office. "Oh, and don't bother asking me stupid questions," she added over her shoulder. "I don't have time to hold your hand." Then, she was gone. Dom spent the first hour at his new desk silently observing. The executives worked on their own schedules, laughing behind closed doors, disappearing for hours at a time. He saw a VP leave the building for lunch at 11 a.m. and not return until nearly 3 p.m. Another spent half the morning scrolling through his phone, ignoring the employees who knocked on his door. Meanwhile, the lower-level employees worked non-stop. Phones rang constantly. Secretaries hurried between floors, balancing coffee trays and stacks of paperwork. Assistants were treated like personal servants. And then, there was him. As the new receptionist, Dom quickly realized his position wasn't just low on the corporate ladder, it was invisible. Employees dropped folders onto his desk without a word. Others spoke to him without making eye contact. He was an afterthought, someone who didn't deserve basic respect. That alone was enough to infuriate him. But it wasn't until Vanessa humiliated him publicly that he truly felt the weight of how bad things had gotten. It started innocently enough. A middle-aged man, clearly a client, approached the desk, his face creased with confusion. He hesitated, glancing between the office doors before finally stepping closer. "Excuse me," he said, his voice polite. "I'm here for an appointment with Mr. Ellis, but no one told me where to go." Dom straightened. "I can check for you." He moved to the computer, quickly scanning the schedule. Before he could say another word, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Oh, let the receptionist do his job," Vanessa said, loud enough for the entire floor to hear. "That's what we pay you for, right?" Laughter followed. Real, genuine laughter from employees nearby, like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all day. Dom froze. Not because of the insult. He'd been in far worse situations in his life. No, what hit him was the reaction. No one looked shocked. No one stood up for him. The disrespect wasn't just normal here. It was expected. Dom swallowed his anger and nodded at the client. "One moment, sir." He ignored Vanessa's smug expression, ignored the snickers, and calmly handed the man directions to his meeting. When he turned back to his desk, Vanessa was watching him, waiting for a reaction, waiting for him to snap. But he didn't. He simply smiled. Because in that moment, Dom realized something crucial. Vanessa thought she had power. She thought she could humiliate him, belittle him, make him feel small. She had no idea who she was dealing with. And that made this game even more interesting. By the end of his first day, Dom had seen enough. He had witnessed the imbalance of power. He had felt the weight of the disrespect. He had experienced firsthand what it was like to be at the bottom, and he wasn't done yet. As he walked out of the building, he glanced back at the glass tower that bore his name. This wasn't just a company. It was his empire, his legacy, and the people inside had forgotten who built it. Dom cracked his knuckles, his mind already racing with his next move. They had played their hand. Now, it was his turn. Dom had spent years building Shaq and Wells into an empire, a company where hard work was supposed to be rewarded and talent was meant to shine. But now, as he sat at his receptionist desk watching the firm operate from the bottom up, he realized that the values he had built this company on had been twisted beyond recognition. It wasn't just a few bad employees. It was a culture, a system where favoritism ruled, where power was hoarded, and where success depended less on talent and more on who you knew. The people who actually worked hard were ignored, and the ones who exploited others, they thrived. Dom had already mentally cataloged the biggest offenders, the ones whose greed and arrogance had gone unchecked for too long. At the top of the toxic hierarchy sat Vanessa King, Richard Ellis, and Samantha Rhodes. 3 people who had transformed Shaq and Wells into their personal playground. Vanessa King, head of administration, the self-proclaimed queen of the office. She handpicked who got promoted, ensuring loyalty over competence. If she didn't like you, You were stuck in the same low-paying role forever. She thrived on humiliating lower-level employees, making sure they always knew who had the real power. Richard Ellis, Executive Vice President of Operations, did absolutely nothing. His golf handicap improved more than the company's efficiency, dumped his work on his subordinates, then took full credit for their efforts. Was known for sending cryptic one-line emails like, "Handle this," before disappearing for the rest of the day. Samantha Rhodes, Senior Manager, the worst of them all. A master manipulator, stealing ideas from young, ambitious employees and presenting them as her own. Knew how to play the game, kissing up to executives while stepping on everyone else. Was ruthless in ensuring no one beneath her succeeded. Dom had seen bad management before. But this was something else. It took less than a week for Dom to realize just how deeply divided the workplace had become. On one side, you had the untouchables, the executives, and senior managers who had carved out their own little kingdom. They took 3-hour lunches, padded their expense accounts, and got away with things that would get anyone else fired. On the other side, the workers, the ones who actually ran the company, the ones who worked late, carried extra responsibilities, and got nothing but criticism in return. And if you complained, you were gone. That's what Lisa Turner told him. Lisa was one of the few genuinely good people left in the company. She worked in HR, a single mother trying to keep her job while navigating a system designed to crush people like her. Dom had seen her rushing in every morning, balancing coffee, a stack of paperwork, and a stressed expression. She was always polite, always working, but always on edge. One afternoon, while Dom was filing paperwork, Lisa slid a document across the desk, lowering her voice. "You need to stop asking questions," she whispered. Dom kept his expression neutral. "I don't know what you mean." Lisa exhaled sharply. "Yes, you do." She glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "You're noticing things, aren't you? Who gets treated well, who doesn't? Who gets opportunities and who gets walked over?" Dom didn't answer. Lisa took his silence as confirmation. "Listen, I've been here long enough to know how this place works," she said, her voice heavy with experience. "You speak up, you disappear. You question authority, you're replaced. That's why people keep their heads down." She looked over his shoulder, checking again for eavesdroppers. "I know what you're trying to do," she added softly. "But be careful. They don't like people who stir the pot." And with that, she walked away. Dom sat there, his jaw clenched. Lisa was right, but he wasn't going to keep his head down. A few days later, Dom witnessed the perfect example of the corruption he had come to uncover. A company-wide meeting was held in the main conference room, a chance for employees to pitch new ideas for expansion. A young intern named Tyler Banks, nervous but excited, stood at the front of the room, pitching an idea for a new client engagement strategy. His hands shook slightly, but his ideas were solid, well-researched, and innovative. Halfway through his presentation, Samantha cut him off. "That's enough," she said dismissively. Tyler froze, his expression falling. "But Samantha waved a hand, barely hiding her smirk. "We get it. Good effort." Then, she turned to the executives and pitched Tyler's exact idea as her own, word for word. The room erupted in applause. Richard Ellis grinned, nodding approvingly. "Now that's the kind of leadership we need." Tyler looked crushed. Dom felt his blood pressure spike. This was worse than he thought. Tyler tried to speak up. "Actually," he said, voice shaking, "that was—" Samantha turned to him, her expression sharp. "You should be grateful you're even in this room," she said, her tone sweet but poisonous. Tyler's mouth opened, then closed. And just like that, he gave up. Dom clenched his fists under the table. He knew what had just happened. Samantha had stolen the work of a young employee who had no power to fight back. And everyone just accepted it. No one challenged her. No one stood up for Tyler. Because this was normal here. Not anymore. Dom inhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. Not yet. But soon. Because after today, he wasn't just taking notes. He was preparing for war. 2 weeks. That's how long it took before they noticed him. At first, Dom had blended in seamlessly. He kept his head down, performed his receptionist duties without question, and watched from the shadows as Shaq and Wells rotted from the inside. He had witnessed the favoritism, the exploitation, the blatant theft of ideas, and the way power was hoarded by those at the top. But Dom had never been the kind of man who could simply observe and do nothing. He had started asking questions. Too many questions. And that's when the real trouble began. Vanessa King had always been perceptive. She had built her kingdom within Shaq and Wells by controlling information and people. She had seen potential threats before they became problems, and she had crushed them without hesitation. Now, she had her sights set on Dom. He wasn't like the other receptionists. He paid too much attention. He lingered in the right conversations. He listened when he was supposed to be invisible. And worst of all, he asked the wrong questions. One morning, as Dom sat behind his desk sorting through paperwork, Vanessa appeared out of nowhere. She dropped a thick folder in front of him with a loud thud. "These need to be reorganized," she said sharply, "and color-coded." Dom arched a brow. "This is HR paperwork." "And?" Vanessa folded her arms, a smirk playing on her lips. "That's not my job." Her smile widened. "I thought receptionists were supposed to be helpful." Dom didn't take the bait. He picked up the folder, set it aside, and continued working. Vanessa's smirk twitched. She wasn't used to being ignored. By lunchtime, the real games began. By mid-afternoon, Vanessa had sent him on 4 separate errands, each more ridiculous than the last. Delivering documents to an office that didn't exist, fetching coffee from across the city when there was a cafe downstairs, rewriting meeting notes she had intentionally scribbled over, calling maintenance for a broken copier that was perfectly fine. Dom knew exactly what she was doing. She was testing him, seeing how far she could push him, seeing if he'd break. But Dom had built an empire from nothing. He had survived boardroom betrayals, economic crashes, and billion-dollar negotiations. He wasn't going to crumble because of a bad manager with a power complex. So, he handled each task with calm efficiency. He refused to react. And that's when Vanessa decided to make an example of him. At exactly 3:15 p.m., Vanessa called out from her desk, "Darius, get me a coffee." Dom didn't even look up from his computer. "I'm not an intern. Get it yourself." A chill spread across the office. Conversations paused. Employees froze. Vanessa slowly stood, adjusting her blouse with exaggerated patience. "I'm sorry," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Did you just say no?" Dom finally met her gaze, his face unreadable. "That's right." A slow, dangerous smirk curled at the edge of Vanessa's lips. She had been waiting for this. "Wow," she mused, placing a hand on her hip. "You'd think someone in your position would be a little more grateful to have a job." Murmurs rippled through the office. A few employees glanced at each other, sensing something was coming. Dom stayed silent. "You know," Vanessa continued, tapping a manicured nail against her desk, "I had a feeling about you. From day one, I knew you'd be lazy. You're just another entitled temp, thinking you're too good for actual work." The words were carefully chosen, designed to cut deep, to make him feel small, to strip him of dignity. A few employees chuckled. Others stayed quiet, pretending to be busy. Dom could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him, and yet, he didn't react. Instead, he smiled. That unnerved Vanessa. Her smirk flickered, just for a second. "You done?" Dom asked, his voice dangerously calm. The room went silent. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me? You done talking?" He leaned back slightly, his expression completely unfazed. "Or do you need another 5 minutes to feel powerful?" A few gasps scattered through the office. Vanessa's face darkened. "You should watch your tone, temp," she hissed. Dom exhaled slowly, standing up from his desk. He was done playing along. "You think I'm beneath you," he said, loud enough for the whole office to hear. "You think because I answer phones and file paperwork, I don't matter, that I don't have value." Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but Dom wasn't finished. "But let me tell you something." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. The people you step on, the ones you humiliate, they remember. And one day, they'll be the ones deciding your future. Vanessa went still. Her confidence wavered, just for a fraction of a second. Dom saw it. He smirked. Then, he sat back down and went back to work, as if nothing had happened. As soon as Vanessa stormed off, the office erupted into hushed whispers. Some employees stared at Dom with shock. A few looked impressed. Lisa Turner, sitting across the room, caught Dom's gaze and gave a small nod. Not everyone had the luxury of standing up to people like Vanessa. But he did. And now? That night, Dom sat at his small apartment, a notebook open on the table, a cheap pen in hand. He wrote down every name, every incident, every abuse of power, and at the top of the page, he wrote 4 words. They think I'm nothing. His jaw clenched as he tapped his pen against the desk, staring at the words. The people at Shaq and Wells had gotten too comfortable. They thought no one was watching. They thought power made them untouchable. But power could be taken away. And Big Shaq was about to take everything from them. Dom knew he was close. 2 weeks had been enough to see the rot inside Shaq and Wells. But now? Now he needed proof. He had seen how Vanessa hoarded power, how Richard avoided work, and how Samantha preyed on the weak. But seeing it wasn't enough. He needed something undeniable. And for that, he needed someone who knew how to dig. That night, sitting in his small apartment with a cheap takeout box in front of him, Dom pulled out his second phone, the one nobody at Shaq and Wells knew about. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the name, Malik Ross. Malik was an investigative journalist, the kind who had exposed some of the biggest corporate scandals in the last 5 years. Dom had helped him once before, back when a corrupt hedge fund had tried to bury fraud allegations. Now, it was time to return the favor. He hit dial. Well, Malik's deep voice came through the line. Big Shaq actually picking up the phone? What, finally get tired of the billionaire lifestyle? Dom chuckled. Something like that. There was a pause. Then, Malik's tone sharpened. You sound serious. I need you to look into my company, Dom said. Discreetly. Malik whistled. Damn, that bad? Worse. Another pause. Then Malik said, Send me names. Dom smirked. Already in your inbox. It didn't take long. Within 4 days, Malik had a file thick enough to burn Shaq and Wells to the ground. And the findings? Worse than Dom had expected. Richard Ellis, Executive Vice President of Operations, embezzlement, had been skimming money from company accounts for years, used fake consulting fees to funnel funds into personal offshore accounts, had ties to a luxury resort in the Cayman Islands, paid for with company money. Samantha Rhodes, senior manager, blackmail, had been threatening employees with false HR complaints to keep them silent, forced younger staff to hand over their best ideas or face sudden performance issues, had dirt on multiple executives, ensuring no one dared to challenge her. Vanessa King, head of administration, nepotism, and corruption, had been secretly hiring her own family members, blocking qualified candidates, had rejected promotions for employees who didn't fit her personal agenda, encouraged a toxic culture where power was kept in the hands of a select few. Dom wasn't surprised. Disgusted? Yes. But shocked? Number. Because this was exactly the kind of entitlement and greed that happened when people thought they were untouchable. And now, Dom had the ammunition to blow it all up. While Malik gathered the hard evidence, Dom continued working from the inside. He listened. He watched. He took notes on everything. He overheard Richard bragging to another executive about his island investments. He saw Samantha cornering a junior employee after a meeting, warning them to stay in their lane. He caught Vanessa laughing about how hard work doesn't matter if you don't have the right connections. But the final straw came one afternoon, when Vanessa went after Lisa Turner. Lisa had always kept her head down. She was a single mother, hard-working, and one of the few people who actually cared about doing a good job, which of course made her a target. It happened in the break room. Dom had been standing by the vending machines, pretending to check his phone, when he heard Vanessa's sharp voice cut through the air. You really think you deserve to be here? Dom's head snapped up, Lisa was standing by the coffee machine, clutching her mug, her face pale. Vanessa leaned against the counter, arms crossed, smirking. "You took off 3 months for maternity leave," Vanessa scoffed. "And now what? You expect a promotion? You should be grateful we didn't replace you." Lisa's eyes flickered with hurt. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. Dom felt his blood turn ice cold, and before he could even stop himself, he stepped forward. His voice was calm, dangerously calm. "What did you just say?" The break room went silent. Vanessa turned slowly, her smirk still in place. "Excuse me?" she said, feigning innocence. Dom took another step forward, standing directly between her and Lisa. "You said she should be grateful?" Dom's voice was even, but there was a razor-sharp edge beneath it. Vanessa raised a brow. "Mind your place, receptionist." The words hung in the air like poison. Lisa looked down, humiliated. Other employees shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. And Dom? Dom had finally had enough. He smiled, not a friendly smile, not an amused smile, but the kind of smile that meant everything was about to change. Dom took a slow step forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You have no idea who you're talking to." Vanessa let out a mocking laugh. "Oh, really? And who exactly are you supposed to be?" Dom didn't answer. Not yet. Because now it was time to set the trap. The morning air felt different as Dom stepped out of his car. No more cheap suits, no more low profile, no more pretending. Today, he wasn't Darius Coleman, the receptionist. He was Big Shaq, the CEO, and he was about to burn everything corrupt to the ground. As soon as Dom walked through the glass doors of Shaq and Wells, the shift was instant. No one ignored him this time. No one brushed past him. Instead, employees froze. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A few people dropped their coffee cups. Because standing before them wasn't the quiet, disrespected temp. It was the man who owned the building. Dom walked straight to the receptionist desk, the very place he had been mocked, humiliated, and treated like he was disposable. He placed his hands on the counter and leaned forward, locking eyes with the actual receptionist. "Good morning, Angela," he said smoothly. Angela's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Mr. Shaq, sir, Don't worry," he said with a knowing smirk. "I got it from here." Then he turned toward the office floor. It was time. The email went out within minutes. Mandatory company meeting. Immediate attendance required. Employees whispered in confusion. Some panicked. Others tried to piece together what was happening. Vanessa? She sat at her desk, completely unaware. Samantha? She was in the middle of sipping her overpriced latte when she saw the email. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Richard? He didn't even bother to read it. But one thing was certain. Everyone showed up. The conference room was packed. Dom stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, watching as people filed in, confused, nervous, uneasy. At exactly 9:30 a.m., he spoke. "I've spent the last 3 weeks in this company as a receptionist," he said, his voice calm but sharp. A murmur rippled through the room. "I watched how you all operated. I saw who worked. I saw who didn't. I saw who abused their power. And today," he paused, letting his gaze land directly on Vanessa. "Today, that stops." Vanessa's smirk twitched. "This is absurd," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You expect us to believe that you, Big Shaq, worked at the front desk? Please." Dom smirked. "Oh, you don't have to believe me. You proved my point every single day." He turned to the side, gesturing toward the massive screen behind him. The moment he clicked the remote, emails, recordings, and security footage filled the screen. Every insult, every rigged promotion, every stolen idea, every lie. It was all there, undeniable. The room erupted, gasps, shock, people staring in horror as weeks of corruption played out before them. And then, Dom turned back to Vanessa. "You," he said, voice like steel. "Out, now." Vanessa's face drained of color. "Excuse me?" she stammered. You can't." "Oh, I can," Dom interrupted, stepping forward. "And I just did." She looked around frantically, expecting someone to speak up for her. No one did. Security stepped in. And just like that, Vanessa King was escorted out of the building she once controlled. Next, Samantha. She let out a nervous laugh. Dom, listen, No, you listen, Dom snapped. You stole from your employees. You threatened them. You used fear to control people. He shook his head. That ends today. 2 security guards appeared behind her, her face twisted with rage, disbelief. You don't get to do this to me, she screeched. I made this company. Dom tilted his head. You stole from this company. Security took her by the arm. She screamed, cursed, but it didn't matter. She was done. Then came Richard. Richard Ellis, Dom sighed, shaking his head. Or should I say Mr. Offshore Accounts? Richard's face went ghost white. Dom clicked a button. A financial report flashed across the screen, one linking him to embezzlement. Richard stood up so fast his chair tipped over. This is a mistake. Oh, I agree, Dom said. Hiring you was the mistake. The guards grabbed Richard before he could even argue. And just like that, the 3 most corrupt people in the company were gone. When the dust settled, Dom looked across the room. Employees still looked stunned. Some were relieved, others were terrified. Lisa Turner, standing near the back, caught his gaze. Dom nodded. She smiled. Then, he turned to the remaining employees. I built this company from the ground up, Dom said, and I refuse to let it turn into a place where power is abused and hard work is ignored. A beat of silence. Then, applause. Real. Genuine. Because for the first time in a long time, Shaq and Wells had a real leader again. The storm had passed. The air inside Shaq and Wells felt lighter now. The tension that had once suffocated the office had lifted, replaced by something new. Something better. The toxic leadership was gone. The people who had ruled through fear, who had stolen, manipulated, and crushed anyone beneath them, escorted out in broad daylight. Now, all that remained were the survivors. And Big Shaq had one final job to do. Dom stood at the front of the main floor, every employee gathered before him. Unlike the last meeting, where fear and confusion had lingered now they were listening. Some looked hopeful, others wary, a few still shocked. Lisa Turner stood near the front, her hands clasped together. The young intern, the one Samantha had humiliated in front of an entire boardroom, was watching with wide eyes. Angela, the receptionist, stood near the back, twisting her hands nervously. They were waiting to see what kind of leader Big Shaq truly was. Dom took a deep breath. You deserved better, he said simply. Silence stretched across the room. I watched good employees get stepped on, Dom continued. I watched hard workers be ignored while power-hungry frauds took everything for themselves. His gaze swept across the room. And I let it happen longer than I should have. A murmur rippled through the employees. Lisa looked up sharply, her eyes searching his face. I built this company, Dom said, his voice steady. But I also failed it. No sugarcoating, no empty promises, just the truth. And then, he took responsibility. Things are going to change, Dom said, pacing slightly. Starting today. He turned to Lisa. Lisa Turner, he called. Lisa's eyes widened. Yes? You've worked here for 5 years, Dom said loud enough for everyone to hear. You've handled more HR issues than anyone, and you did it while balancing being a single mother, without ever getting the credit you deserve. Lisa's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. Dom smiled. Congratulations, Director Turner. You just got promoted. Gasps. Lisa froze, her hands flying to her mouth. You're serious? She whispered. Dead serious, Dom said. This company needs people who actually care about the employees. He gestured to her. And that's you. The room erupted in applause. Lisa blinked rapidly, tears forming in her eyes. She covered her face with her hands, shaking her head in disbelief. Dom grinned. One down. He turned to the young intern in the back. You, Dom said, pointing. You had an idea stolen from you. And I saw how you were treated for speaking up. The intern's face turned red. I, Dom crossed his arms. You ever had your own project? The intern shook his head quickly. No, sir. You do now. The intern nearly collapsed. Wait, really? Dom nodded. Effective immediately, you're leading your own team. We'll be reviewing your idea properly, and you'll get full credit. No more stolen work. Another round of applause. Dom turned to Angela, the receptionist. She immediately stiffened. You got something to say to me? Dom asked, tilting his head. Angela swallowed. Then, with obvious hesitation, she nodded. You're not what I thought, she admitted. I should have treated you better. Dom smirked. Appreciate the honesty. She exhaled, relieved. This was what the company had been missing. Not fear, not control. Accountability, respect, balance. And Dom wasn't done yet. Dom made 3 major announcements that morning. A full audit. Every department was getting reviewed. Promotions would be reevaluated. No more nepotism. Employee protections. A new anonymous reporting system was put in place to protect against future abuses. A culture reset. Every employee deserved a voice. Those who did the work would get the rewards. For the first time in years, Shaq and Wells wasn't a battlefield. It was a company again. By the afternoon, the office felt different. The whispers of fear? Gone. The tense, suffocating air? Lifted. Dom walked through the halls, his halls, and watched as people moved with new energy. Employees greeted him, not out of fear, but with genuine smiles. The junior staff spoke up in meetings without hesitation. The executives who remained? They knew things had changed for good. Dom finally stepped into his office, his real one. The chair was just as he had left it. The desk untouched. He sat down, exhaling slowly. And as he leaned back, one final thought crossed his mind. They never saw him coming. What would you do if the people you trusted were betraying you behind your back? Big Shaq didn't just sit back. He stepped into the fire, uncovering the corruption hidden in his own company. His story is one of power, deception, and ultimate justice. But it's more than just a tale. It's a lesson. Would you recognize injustice if it was happening right in front of you? Don't just watch. Immerse yourself in this gripping journey of truth and redemption. Like, share, and comment if you believe real leadership is about more than just power. Because sometimes, the only way to fix a broken system is to expose it.